Today I'm going to be doing part 1 of my December 2025 wrap up. I'll be talking about the first 6 books I read in the month of December because I read a total of 12. So I need to, again, break this wrap up into 2 parts. In December, I did read, at least in the first half, all fiction, some new releases. Actually read about 3 2025 releases, and they range from historical fiction, speculative, and some classics or 20th century classics in there. So if you're interested, stick around and we will get started. The first book I finished November into December was What Hunger by Deng. This was nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards, like their top 20 in the first round of voting in horror. And yeah, that's how I heard about it. This, I think, was advertised a little bit incorrectly. This reads more like YA horror, just the tone and style of writing. So I kind of should have known right off the bat as I started reading it that this was really not going to be for me, but it was so short, so I just read it anyway. The inside flap mentions that it's going to be like a mother-daughter bonding cannibal story, that doesn't come until like the last 90% of the book, but anyway, that's irrelevant. So this is about a Vietnamese American girl named Ronnie. She's 14, she's about to start high school, and this is, I could kind of tell, the early 2000s. So there's the internet, but there's no cell phones, or there's no like smartphones. And there is this family tragedy that happens, and then she goes to an upperclassman party, her first week of high school, and at this party she is assaulted, raped. I'm just gonna say rape. You know what? I'm not monetized, so I hate when people have to like censor themselves with certain words. She is SA'd at this party. And then because of just like her bubbling adolescent rage and family grief and this horrible assault, she turns rather cannibalistic and starts to have violent fantasies about eating her rapist's flesh, and she starts having a craving for raw meat. I don't think I really enjoyed this that much. It was just kind of so-so. I felt like the tone was like kind of off. Like it felt like it was halfway between cartoonish and halfway between trying to take itself seriously, and I felt like the author should have just picked a lane and been one or the other. Like a book that was much more cartoony but dealt with like similar themes of the Asian American diaspora experience and like the strong presence of food as part of your heritage was Revenge of the Mooncake Vixen by Marilyn, which is also like a collection of female rage short stories. This did not, I felt like that was better done than this. And also, if she didn't want to do it too cartoonish, she should have, I think, leaned more into the serious aspect of it. Because another example of that, what I can think of is a young girl who was sexually assaulted around the same age is Speak by Laurie Halse Anderson, which I read when I was, in middle school. It stayed with me all those years. And I just sort of felt like the way Ronnie reacts to her sexual assault, it just felt flat and one-dimensional. And not in a way of like someone who's traumatized and numb, but like in a way that just felt cartoony. I don't know how to explain it. Also, like on a side note, meat isn't bloody. Like red meat is myoglobin. I think I'm saying that right. I would have thought like an editor or a proofreader would have noticed that, but they didn't. So it's not like terrible, this book, but it's just forgettable. Unfortunately, it was a bit of a flop. The next book I read was by another Asian American author, and that was Flashlight by Susan Choi. This is a sprawling family saga that spans multiple generations across the Korean Peninsula, Japan, and California. And it is based on very loosely based on real events that happened in the late 70s and early 80s. Now, I heard about this book actually through my mom, and this was shortlisted for the Booker. And so I do love Susan Choi's writing. I did read last year, or now the year before, A Person of Interest, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was top notch. And so in both of those novels, she kind of does the same thing where she's taking from real life events and kind of like, she either mixes them together or she sort of like fills in her own gaps. And while I do think that this novel is really well written, I think that she needs a better editor. I mentioned this in my like end of year booktube tag, a book that was frustrating, and I had like just finished this book around that time, and this book was very frustrating to read because it is so meandering. It is full of so many different characters and subplots, and she goes on these very long tangents that don't add anything to the heart of the story. And the heart of the story is actually a really fascinating period in history. I mean, Susan Choi reminds me a little bit of Donna Tartt. Like, after I read The Little Friend years ago, I was like, great writing, amazing, beautiful, but like pages and pages of this that is so unsatisfying because in some parts it leads to nowhere. So in order for me to like really talk about this book, I do kind of have to give spoilers. So if you want to read this book, please skip ahead. So in the early 80s, we follow this American family, a father and a daughter. His name is Shirk. I don't know if I'm saying that right. He is Korean American. He was born and raised in Japan. Now, there's a whole imperial history of Japan's colonization of the Korean peninsula as to why he has sort of like this mixed identity with like Japanese and then also Korean. But anyway, he gets this teaching job overseas in Japan, and so he takes his family with him. And him and his daughter, Louisa is biracial because Shirk married a white woman. They're walking along one night along a Japanese beach, and later on that night, she's about 8 years old. She's found like nearly drowned at the water's edge, and she doesn't really have a clear memory of what happened. And Shirk's body is never found. So he's presumed dead, that he just drowned and the currents pulled him away. Now, Occam's razor says that's what happened, but that's actually not it. This is based on real events in the late 70s, early 80s, where North Korea did kidnap Japanese civilians from beaches. So this is actually what happens to him, as we will find out. I found a lot of similarities between Shirk, I'm sorry, I'm not saying that right, and the main male character of A Person of Interest. Like, they're both these two first-generation Korean American men who are teachers, and they're emotionally distant, and they're estranged from their wives and their daughters, and they're both like cagey and elusive about their past, and also rather resentful. But ultimately, like, these characters are just swept up into these events that are much bigger than they are. I think when we didn't have like all of these meandering subplots and side characters, like I said, I think the history is really fascinating. And I give props to Susan we do go to North Korea at one point in the story. And her just imagining that just only based on secondhand accounts, I think was, like I said, I give her credit to that because it's very difficult, I think, to write about that when you don't have like firsthand accounts about a country that is the Hermit Kingdom. But there's just way too much meandering stuff going on in here. And I think that was the thing for me, was that like by the end of the novel, which is very touching and moving because of the pace of this novel and because of so much fluff that is around it, I just didn't really feel as moved because I was like honestly kind of exhausted, which is unfortunate. I think like 200 pages of this should have been cut. But it is well written, is a very unique story. So if you like long meandering stuff with like multi-generational, in some sense, family sagas, I would recommend it. But yeah, it just was like, it was a little frustrating because I know that this could have been even better. But nonetheless, I did rate it 4 stars. The next book I finished was a novella, and that was I Lock My Door Upon Myself by Joyce Carol Oates. This was published in 1990, and it very much has the tone and writing style of a late 20th century Joyce Carol Oates. As someone who has read a decent amount of her work, and she's someone who has published such like an extensive span of writing for over 50 years, you'll know what I mean, kind of, because she has, like, distinct styles at different periods of her writing, right? So this is a novella about family secrets and the black sheep, so to speak, of families, and why these people are black sheep, what is their story, family recluses, all that. So the story is an outside narrator. I'm forgetting now if it's like a narration within a narration, but it's kind of bookended with this granddaughter, and I think it takes place, I'm not quite clear when the present is, but the historical fiction part is in like the turn of the 20th century, 1910s, in upstate New York, typical Oates. It follows this young woman named Kala, and the family's like working class, and she's married off, and she ends up having this affair with a black water dowser. And so it's secretive, but then they're found out, and so that sets off a whole chain of events, and then leads to why she becomes this, like, shut-in. I don't really know how much more I can, like, talk about this because it's just so short without giving away spoilers. I enjoyed it, for what it was. It's very brief. I thought it was well written. It does deal a lot with, like, that sort of, like, missed opportunity, I think, we have of elders who have passed, and, like, wishing that you could have asked them more about specific things, about, like, their lives, and what they went through, and like why they did what they did or what they thought of this. I did love some of the lines. For as each dies, a part of the old world dies with her. And another one I had marked was, because we are linked by blood, and blood is memory without language. So yeah, I don't really have much more to say about this, but I did rate it 4 stars. The next book I finished was a classic from the 70s, and that is Sula by Toni Morrison. Now, I think I mentioned Song of Solomon. There are a couple books in this wrap-up where I talked about, like, my 10 before the end, and I had said, I was going to reread Song of Solomon, but I ended up swapping that out for Sula, because I've had Sula on my TBR for a while, and I just sort of had a feeling that I was gonna like this the most out of the Toni Morrison I've read, and I was right, because it deals centrally with 2 women and female friendship over the years, and that is a lot of what I read, women-centered stories. So this takes place, it's also in, like, the turn of the 20th century, although it goes into, like, it's the early 20th century, like, it follows, like, the 30s and 40s, in this small town in Ohio, and you see, like, from these 2 main characters, Nell and Sula, we also follow their, like, 3 generations of black women. We follow, like, the stories of their grandmothers, and then of their mothers, and then ultimately them. So the 2 girls meet at a boarding house that Sula's grandmother owns, Eva, and that is how they become good friends. They are both only children, and they grew up together very close, and then Sula moves away to college. And so Nell, in the meantime, in the period of like 10 years, Nell has sort of done like the traditional thing that women were expected. Like, she is married, she has children, because she comes from this background of, like, her grandmother was a New Orleans prostitute. And then Nell comes back from, I forget, like, might have been Chicago. And she's, like, definitely more of the free-spirited, doesn't care what people think. In some ways, it's also, like, a slice of Americana life, but from an African-American perspective. because we also do get into like the overall town, as well as there's like a couple other side characters we follow, and Toni Morrison did that in The Bluest Eye, so we have that here as well. There is like a subplot of this, I forget if it was a mine, I think, that the township was developing, and the people of the town, like the black section, wanted to work in this mine, and we see like how the town just like sidesteps them and hires white immigrants, or like the poor whites, but that's beside the point. So Sula and Nell, like their relationship and the roles that are like specifically designated for black women, like the few opportunities are explored in this time in this book. And so you have like these two women that sort of fit into almost like this Madonna whore complex, or you could say specifically for black women, like that stereotype of the Jezebel that Sula falls into. And so we just sort of see like how black women during this time period are forced to survive and carve out a place of their own in a world that is doubly oppressive because of their race and gender. And it also deals a lot with like female friendship and the nuances of that, and the complexity and betrayal, and then men kind of been getting in the way of friendship. I mean, I overall enjoyed it. Like there were certain things that I could relate to, specifically because she touches on to Toni Morrison how for only children having friends is, there's like a heightenedness to it because you don't have siblings, and that's what she like mentions how Sula and Nell feel. To be honest with you, the only thing I wished was just that it was longer, which is funny because I usually don't say that about works, but it's quite short. It's under 200 pages, and you know, there's a period where like the two women don't speak to each other. They don't even communicate in 10 years when Sula goes to college, and I just wish we had seen more of their lives during that time. I really like this. I would highly recommend it. I did highlight a couple quotes. One of my favorite was, "She had been looking all along for a lover that was not a comrade and could never be for a woman." So I did end up rating this 4 stars. The next book I read was a 2025 release, and that was Will There Ever Be Another You by Patricia Lockwood. I've already talked about this book on my channel, so it did make my worst books of the year. You can check out that video. Yeah, I totally got this book, I had mentioned, because of the cover. It is beautiful. It is also cute. And the title. This, I think, is also marketed slightly incorrectly in terms of saying that it is a novel. It is more of like a series of interconnected essays, I would say, that are autofiction and somewhat meta. I mean, this is essentially Patricia Lockwood writing about her experience with COVID brain fog, even though it's never like specifically named. And it deals a lot with like her career, her writing career, her relationship with her dad, who is this preacher man. I mean, I actually had to look up Patricia Lockwood's biography on Wikipedia because I really didn't know anything about her. She's written for TV shows, or I think a TV show that was like loosely based on her life. I think maybe her memoir, which is called Preacherdaddy. And it's very avant-garde. I just I wasn't wild about this. This was kind of a flop for me. I think that she has talent. Like, I can tell the sentences, like, I can tell she has like some craft, right, and care that is given to the sentences, but this is just so disjointed, and there were parts where I just did not understand what I was reading, even though my eyes were reading it. There was one chapter on her reading Anna Karenina, which is so just like gibberish completely. I mean, I've never read that book, but I just had no idea what I was reading. It was tedious. It was nonsensical. And then there was other parts that I thought were fine. Like, there were moments of, I thought, really good, observant, and darkly humorous quotes. I mean, a lot of this book is sickness too, because her husband has like a very, I don't remember, I looked this up, and it was like a very rare disorder, and then he has to get in operation in this book and was quite graphic and detailed. I mean, I did pick out a couple quotes that I liked. One of the quotes which really stuck with me was, "The defining events of their time, 9/11 for instance, had never properly entered into literature because almost as soon as they happened, they were transformed into propaganda." That's a great line. I mean, literally, I feel like I only bumped it up to 3 stars because of that line. And there was another funny moment, too, about this, like, confusion of Galapagos, the Galapagos Islands, where it's this, like, a similar sounding place in Ohio. And she said instead of, like, the home of Charles Darwin, it was the home of Bob Evans or something. And I kind of did chuckle at that. But yeah, like, overall, this was just not my thing. And I honestly, it was not very long. It was like 235 pages or something. The cat, I don't know why there's a cat on the cover, because really does not feature into this at all, except for one scene where her cat eats a lizard and then he pukes. And I mean, yeah, that was, I think, the thing too, besides the writing style. There is this aspect, though, that besides being so self-referential, it was a little bit, like, hipster-esque. Like, she was dropping these, like, really obscure movies and music albums, and I, like, had no idea what she was talking about. I had to look it up, and, I'm just, like, okay, girl, like, whatever. And now the last book I will be discussing was Bridge by Laurie Beukes. I'm not sure if I'm saying her last name right. I didn't really love this. Was kind of a flop for me too. I rated this 3 stars. It's not quite 2 stars. Maybe I should have put this in, like, my disappointing and worst books of the year as well. I had just finished it when I made that video, though, like, not that long ago, and I had to let it percolate for a bit. But, like, this book just, like, kind of annoyed me in certain aspects. And yeah, so this is a speculative sci-fi-ish type of novel. It is very plot heavy, and the writing style wasn't really, like, I wasn't a fan. It was, like, very simplistic. There's not a lot of character development here because I think it is so plot focused. So it deals with this woman named Bridge, short for Bridget, and her mother dies, and she finds her mother was this scientist who was working with this thing called the dream worm, which is, like, an actual substance that has, like, these different strands around it, and she apparently got it in Haiti on a trip or whatever, or I don't even remember the details. And so strands of this worm allow you to hop into these different, like, multiverses, and you see, like, different yous, but, like, when you do that, you switch bodies with that you in that universe. So that person comes back into the present in your place, and you go in their place. So the main plot of the story is that Bridge is trying to find her mom, because she believes that the woman that died was not actually her real mom. It was, like, one of these others. And so her mom is still alive in one of these multiverses. So there's one of the characters is, like, the sidekick best friend character named Dom. Dom is non-binary Puerto Rican, and that is basically this is one of the things that annoyed me about this, the representation here. Dom is very much tokenized, I felt. Like, that is their whole personality. We get a lot about them being non-binary, and then they randomly shout phrases in Spanish. Like, I get that, like, people are trying to be more diverse, but, like, if you're gonna write non-white characters or queer characters, like, can you give us a little more than that? Because it just feels very tokenistic, okay? Like, that just kind of annoyed me, to be honest. And there's, like, another guy involved with this thing, too, when they're, like, hopping in the dream worm, and I don't even remember his name. I'm sorry. I don't know. There's a lot of, like, social commentary, too, that felt a little bit too try-hard, like, a little too ham-fisted, and it wasn't really working for me. I know a lot of people said that they found this confusing because of all the different selves. There is, in the meantime, also this woman named Amber, who is this, like, PTSD, evil Iraq war vet, and she's out trying to find the dream worm. A lot of this is honestly already fading from my memory, except my irritation at this book, which is good because I want books I didn't really care for to be expunged from my memory. So yes, it's like a high pack kind of thriller-esque vibe where, you know, Amber is coming to like hunt down the different bridges that are in these different multiverses. And that was the other thing too I felt with these multiverses. The author was not very creative in imagining other worlds. Like, literally, the other multiverses were identical to ours. The only difference, literally, are the social media platform names. That was it. Like, Facebook is like Checkbook or something. Like, Reddit is Check It. That was one. And I was like, and then even she says in the narrator or bridge thinks like, oh, like, big tech has spread its hands into these multiverses as well. It's like, really? Like, that's just so unoriginal. Like, if anyone who has studied history knows, there are events of history where the present could have turned out so differently had X, Y, and Z happened or not happened. And that I just felt was a lack of imagination. That, like, the only difference you can think of in these other worlds is literally that the company names of big tech platforms are different. I just, like, what? Yeah, so the only thing that made me honestly keep reading was that I was curious to see how it ended, but it ends rather open-ended. Like, there's a sequel that is going to be happening. Like, there's certain things that were not wrapped up or just, like, questions were not answered. And, yeah, I rated this 3 stars. It was more like 2.5. Yeah. So yeah, that is it. Those are the first 6 books I read in December. I will be coming back for the rest of my wrap up. And yes, I did read better books, aside from the older books, honestly, aside from Joyce Carol Oates and Toni Morrison. I mean, yeah, I did like Flashlight overall, despite my frustration. Like, yeah, some of these newer releases were flops for me, unfortunately, because Bridge came out, I think, in 2023. So yeah, let me know down below if you have read any of these books, or if you want to, or if you have any other suggestions that you think are similar to these books, but maybe better. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.